I'm Jessica, 29, female, and my own family just deliberately uninvited me to a celebration I didn't even know I wasn't formally invited to. It sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? A confusing, painful riddle that has been the background music of my entire life. But this time, the music stopped, and all that was left was a ringing silence that was louder than any argument we ever had. It began, as these things often did, with a phone call from my older sister, Megan. I was at my apartment, sketching out a new logo design for a client, surrounded by the organized chaos of my life as a graphic designer. My phone buzzed on the desk, displaying her name. I felt that familiar, reflexive tightening in my stomach, a knot of hope and dread I'd carried since childhood. I pushed the dread down and let the hope win, as I always did. "Hey, Megan," I said, trying to sound breezy and casual. "Jess, hey, listen, I don't have much time, the kids are running wild," she started, her voice already rushed. "Mark and I are celebrating our anniversary on Saturday. We're just having a small dinner at the Laurent." The Laurent? My mind immediately conjured images of crystal glasses and white tablecloths. It was one of the most exclusive, expensive restaurants in the city, the kind of place you book months in advance for a special occasion. A place my family went to mark milestones that, for some reason, rarely seemed to include me in a meaningful way. "Wow, that sounds amazing. Happy anniversary," I said, my voice genuine. A part of me, the eternally optimistic part, was already picturing it. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment they finally decided to pull me back into the inner circle. "Thanks," she said dismissively, the sound of a child whining in the background. "Anyway, we'll be there around 7. You should pop by." Pop by, the two words hung in the air between us. It wasn't "we've saved a seat for you" or "we'd love for you to join us." It was casual, flimsy, like I was an afterthought she'd just had. But the hopeful part of me, the part that so desperately wanted to belong, latched onto it. "She invited me," it whispered. "She wants me there." "Oh yeah, sure," I replied, trying to match her casual tone. "I'd love to, I'll just pop by." "Great, gotta go, talk later," she said, and the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. Pop by, it was a classic Megan move, an invitation wrapped in plausible deniability. If I didn't show up, she could say, "Well, I told her to come." If I did show up and it was awkward, she could say, "Oh, I just meant if you were in the area." It was a way of holding me at arm's length while maintaining the appearance of being an inclusive sister. And yet I decided to go. I had to, because the alternative, admitting they didn't really want me there, was a truth I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. This dance was nothing new. My family life was a carefully constructed hierarchy, with my father, Richard, at the top and my sister, Megan, as his perfect, flawless heir. I was other. The satellite, orbiting the warm, bright sun of their perfect family unit. The favoritism wasn't just in my head, it was baked into the very foundation of our history, written in the ink of 1,000 tiny cuts and a few major wounds. I remember Megan's high school graduation. Our backyard was transformed into a catered wonderland. A massive white tent stood on the lawn, tables were draped in linen, and professional servers moved through the crowd of over 100 guests with trays of hors d'oeuvres. My father gave a booming, heartfelt speech about his pride in his firstborn, how she was destined for greatness. It was a production, a statement. 4 years later, I graduated from college with honors. I was the first person in our family to get a degree from a 4-year university. I had worked 2 jobs to supplement my scholarships and loans, and I was so proud. My party? A last-minute backyard barbecue. My dad, Richard, was supposed to be in charge of the food. He showed up an hour late with half the number of burgers needed because he'd been busy helping Megan move into a new apartment across town. When I quietly pointed out that we didn't have enough for my 20 guests, he sighed dramatically and said, "Jessica, don't be difficult. People can share." I spent my own graduation party cutting hamburger patties in half, a smile plastered on my face while my heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. Then there was the car incident. For Megan's 21st birthday, a brand new cherry red convertible appeared in the driveway, a giant bow on the hood. My dad beamed as he handed her the keys, a symbol of her entry into sophisticated adulthood. For my 21st birthday, 3 years later, my dad handed me a transit pass and a crisp envelope. Inside wasn't cash, but a printout of a spreadsheet he'd made, detailing a 5-year financial plan for me. It's time to learn about real-world responsibility, Jessica, he'd said, puffing out his chest as if he were bestowing a great gift. It didn't matter that I was already the responsible one, the one juggling classes and work, paying my own way while Megan's rent and car insurance were still being quietly subsidized by him. In his eyes, she deserved support. I deserved lessons. The most painful part was how they framed my reactions. Any time I tried to express my hurt, to talk about the inequality, I was shut down with the same 4 words. You're being too sensitive. It was their get-out-of-jail-free card for any act of casual cruelty. I once tried to talk to my mom about it, asking her why Megan always seemed to get the benefit of the doubt. My dad overheard and stepped in, placing a hand on my shoulder with a look of patronizing concern. "Jessica, honey," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Your sister is just easier. You have this tendency to make everything dramatic. You read into things that aren't there. You're just so sensitive." Megan, of course, weaponized this diagnosis. It became her favorite refrain. If I questioned why I was the last to find out about a family vacation, she'd roll her eyes and text back, "God, don't be so sensitive. It just came up." If I expressed disappointment about being left out of a plan, she'd report back to our parents that Jessica is having one of her dramatic moments again. Over time, it worked. I started to believe it. I started to think that maybe the problem was me. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I did read into things, so I tried harder. I became quieter, more agreeable. I swallowed my hurt and disappointment and showed up with a smile, hoping that one day they would see my effort and finally let me in. This anniversary dinner felt like the ultimate test of that theory. Pop by, it was a crumb, but I was determined to treat it like a whole loaf. I would go. I would be cheerful, charming, and uncomplicated. I would be the daughter and sister they claimed they wanted. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The optimist in me, the one who refused to die no matter how many times she was starved, won the battle. I decided to treat Megan's casual invitation not as the ambiguous slight it probably was, but as a genuine, if clumsily extended, olive branch. This would be the time it would be different. I would make it different. My first step was the gift. I wasn't going to show up with a generic bottle of wine or a gift card. I wanted to give them something deeply personal, something that said, "I care about you. I am paying attention." Mark and Megan had gotten married at a beautiful botanical garden, and their favorite photo from the day was one of them under a massive, ancient willow tree. I had the photo. I spent the next 2 days not just working on my client projects, but on a secret one of my own. I created a detailed, elegant line art illustration of that willow tree, capturing the way the branches cascaded down. Beneath it, I lettered their names and their wedding date in a beautiful, flowing script. I had it printed on high-quality archival paper and framed it in a simple, elegant black frame. It was tasteful, personal, and it cost me a significant amount of time and effort. It was a piece of my heart, offered up as a peace offering. On Saturday evening, I stood in front of my closet, a sense of nervous energy buzzing under my skin. The Laurent was a place with an unspoken dress code. I chose a simple, sophisticated dark blue dress that I usually saved for important client meetings. It was professional but elegant. I did my hair and makeup carefully, wanting to look put together, like someone who belonged in a room full of successful, happy people. As I looked at my reflection, I saw a woman who looked confident and calm, even if her stomach was doing nervous flip-flops. I picked up the beautifully wrapped gift from my bed and, taking a deep breath, walked out the door. The drive downtown was filled with a mental rehearsal of cheerful conversation starters. The restaurant was even more intimidating in person. A discreet brass plaque on a dark mahogany door was the only sign of its name. A valet, dressed in a sharp uniform, took my keys with a polite nod. Pushing the heavy door open, I stepped into a world of hushed tones, soft lighting, and the clinking of expensive silverware. The air smelled of old money and gourmet food. My simple dress suddenly felt inadequate. I smoothed it down, clutched my gift a little tighter, and approached the host's stand, a beautiful carved podium bathed in a warm, welcoming light. A man in a perfectly tailored suit looked up and smiled. He had the kind of polished, professional demeanor that could put anyone at ease or make them feel hopelessly out of place. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Do you have a reservation?" "Hello," I said, my own voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet space. "I'm her. To meet my family, the Thompson party." His smile didn't falter. He turned to his large, leather-bound book, running a manicured finger down the page. He paused, his brow furrowing just slightly. He traced the list again. "The Thompson party, you said?" "Yes, for Megan and Mark Thompson's anniversary. My father, Richard Thompson, might have made the reservation," I added, trying to be helpful. My heart started to beat a little faster. He checked again, turning a page. "Ah, yes, the Thompson party is here, in the garden room." He looked back at the list in front of him and then back at me. His polite smile became a little more fixed, a little more professional. "I'm sorry, but what was your name?" Jessica Thompson." He scanned the list one last time. He looked up, and his expression was one of polite, unshakable regret. "I'm very sorry, but you're not on the seating list for this party." The words hit me like a physical blow. Air rushed out of my lungs. "What? There must be a mistake," I stammered, my carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. "My sister, Megan, she invited me. She told me to come." "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," the host said, his voice gentle but firm. "But the reservation was made for 5 guests. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, their 2 children, and Mr. Richard Thompson. The table is set for 5. I cannot seat you without the host's permission." 5 guests. Megan, Mark, their 2 kids, and my dad. A perfect, complete number. No room for a stray sister. The phrase "pop by" echoed in my head, no longer ambiguous but sharp and cruel. It wasn't an invitation. It was a dismissal disguised as one. Tears pricked at the back of my eyes, hot and shameful. Can you just point them out to me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I just want to see." He hesitated for a moment, his professional mask softening with a flicker of what looked like genuine pity. "Of course," he said softly. "They're just through here, past the partition." He gestured towards an archway partially obscured by a large, ornate screen. I took a tentative step forward, my legs feeling unsteady. I held my breath and peeked around the edge of the screen. And there they were. They were seated at a large, round table in a beautiful, glass-enclosed atrium that overlooked a small, twinkling garden. The table was covered in white linen, sparkling glasses, and fine china. My father, Richard, was at the head of the table, holding a glass of red wine, his face lit up as he told a story. Megan was laughing, her head thrown back, looking radiant. Mark was smiling at her, a look of adoration on his face. My mother was there too, looking content and happy. They were a perfect portrait of family bliss. In the center of the table, there was a floral arrangement, not an empty place setting. There was no space for me. There was never any space for me. They were all there, a complete set. Laughing, celebrating. And I was on the outside, a stranger in a nice dress, holding a useless, heartfelt gift, looking in at a life I was related to by blood but not by bond. The humiliation was a physical sensation. It was a hot flush that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. They hadn't just forgotten me. They hadn't made a mistake. They had actively, deliberately excluded me, and then, to add a layer of exquisite cruelty, Megan had dangled the possibility of inclusion in front of my face, knowing full well she would snatch it away. She wanted me to show up. She wanted me to be turned away. This was the point. The humiliation was the gift. I pulled back from the screen, my vision blurring with unshed tears. I looked at the host, who was watching me with that same pitying expression. I couldn't speak. I just gave a tight, jerky nod as if to say, "Thank you, I see now." The carefully wrapped frame in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I stumbled back from the archway, my body moving on autopilot. My first instinct was to flee, to run out of the restaurant, get in my car, drive home, and dissolve into the kind of soul-shaking sobs that leave you hollowed out and gasping for air. The shame was a physical cloak, heavy and suffocating. I could feel the eyes of the host on me, the sympathetic tilt of his head, a confirmation of my pathetic situation. I reached the grand entrance, my hand hovering over the heavy brass handle of the door. And then, something inside me stopped. It was a strange sensation. The storm of emotion, the hurt, the rage, the profound, bone-deep sadness didn't vanish. Instead, it coalesced. It compressed from a chaotic tempest into a single, hard, cold point in the center of my chest. The hot tears receded. My trembling hands grew still. The frantic, panicked buzzing in my head fell silent, replaced by a sudden, unnerving calm. It was the clarity of utter and complete exhaustion. The exhaustion of a runner who has just finished a marathon they ever signed up for. I was done. Done hoping. Done trying. Done auditioning for a role I was never going to be cast in. Done being their emotional punching bag, the one they could slight and then call too sensitive when she flinched. I looked at the gift in my hands. The beautiful frame, the personal artwork, the symbol of my foolish, stubborn hope. Leaving now would be exactly what they expected. I would disappear quietly into the night, nursing my wounds in private, and in a week they would call, my mother probably, and tell me I had misunderstood and needed to apologize for making things awkward. They would spin the narrative, as they always did, until I was the villain of my own story. Not this time. I wouldn't cause a scene. I wouldn't storm into the dining room and confront them. That would only feed their narrative of me being the dramatic one. My father, Richard, prized appearances above all else. A public spectacle was his greatest fear. And my sister, Megan, loved nothing more than to watch me unravel. I would not give either of them the satisfaction. No, my response had to be like them, quiet, cutting, and delivered with a smile. I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to leave a mark. A new plan began to form, not born of rage, but of this newfound, icy resolve. I turned away from the exit and scanned the restaurant floor. My eyes landed on a senior server, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair who was expertly deboning a fish at a nearby table. He looked experienced, unflappable. He was perfect. I walked over to him, my steps measured and confident. The woman I was just moments ago, the trembling, humiliated girl on the verge of tears, was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized. Someone who was finally, completely, out of second chances to give. He finished with the fish and turned, noticing me waiting patiently. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. "Yes, you can," I said, my voice even and steady. I was surprised at how calm I sounded. "Could I please see your wine list?" He looked slightly confused, as I wasn't seated at a table, but my composed demeanor must have convinced him. He nodded and fetched a heavy, leather-bound list from a nearby station, handing it to me. I opened it, my fingers tracing down the list of whites, then reds. I skipped past the familiar names and the reasonable prices. I went straight to the back page, the one titled Vintages and Rarities. My eyes scanned the astronomical figures, numbers that were more like mortgage payments than prices for a beverage. And then I saw it. Tucked at the bottom of the list, a name that radiated prestige and an almost comical level of expense. A 1998 Shadow Margox. The price listed next to it was $1,970. It was perfect. It was absurd. It was a price that couldn't be ignored or brushed aside. It was a statement. I looked up at the server and pointed to the line. "This one," I said simply. His eyebrows shot up. "The 98 Margox, miss, an excellent choice, but it is quite expensive." He was being polite, trying to save me from a potential mistake. "I'm aware," I said, offering him a small, tight smile. "I'd like you to send this bottle to the Thompson table in the garden room." Now he was truly confused. To their table? Should I let them know who it's from? "That won't be necessary," I said smoothly. "Just present the bottle to them. And when it comes time for the bill, please add this charge directly to their check. The entire evening is being paid for by Richard Thompson. He's the gentleman at the head of the table. I was playing a risky game, relying on the restaurant's deference to wealthy-looking patrons and the inherent assumption that a family celebrating would be generous with each other. I held his gaze, my expression unwavering. I projected an aura of absolute authority, as if I were a CEO executing a standard business transaction. The server hesitated for a fraction of a second, his mind clearly racing through the possible scenarios. But my confidence, my expensive dress, and the sheer audacity of the request seemed to work. He saw a well-dressed young woman from a party in the private room making a specific, confident request. He made a decision. "Of course, miss," he said with a crisp nod. "1 bottle of the 98 Chateau Margaux for the Thompson table. Billed to Mr. Richard Thompson. I'll take care of it immediately." "Thank you," I said. He walked away toward the bar, and I turned, not toward the exit, but toward the long, polished bar that ran along one wall of the main dining area. The gift was still in my hand. I walked over to a trash receptacle, a discreet, elegant wooden bin near the coat check. I looked down at the illustration of the willow tree, the symbol of their love and my exclusion. And then, without ceremony, I dropped the entire framed picture into the bin. It landed with a soft, muffled thud. The heavy cloak of shame was gone, replaced by a feeling I couldn't quit. Name, it wasn't happiness or glee. It was a sense of profound, liberating finality. I had just set a time bomb, and I wasn't going to miss the show. I didn't leave. Leaving would have felt incomplete, like writing a story and tearing out the last page. I needed to see this through to its conclusion. I walked over to the far end of the restaurant's bar, choosing a stool that was partially hidden by a large pillar but still offered a sliver of a view into the garden room. It felt fitting to be observing from the shadows one last time. "Just a glass of water, please," I told the bartender, who gave me a curious look but complied without a word. As I sat there, sipping my water, the adrenaline of the moment began to fade, and a wave of reflection washed over me. It wasn't the fiery, self-pitying kind of reflection I was used to. It was colder, more analytical. I felt like an archaeologist examining the ruins of a long-lost civilization, trying to understand how it all went so wrong. Why had I kept trying for so long? The answer was simple and painful. They were my family. There's an innate, primal pull toward the people who are supposed to be your anchor in the world. You keep going back to the well, even when it's dry, because you remember a time when you thought it was full. You convince yourself that one day, the rain will come and it will be full again. My mind drifted back to smaller moments, the tiny paper cuts that had bled me dry over the years. I remembered being 12 and winning the school-wide art competition. I ran home, my blue ribbon clutched in my hand, bursting with pride. I found my dad in the garage. "Dad, look," I'd shouted. He glanced at my ribbon, then at the half-finished birdhouse he was building for Megan's school project, which was due the next day. "That's nice, honey," he said, his attention already back on sanding a piece of wood. "Now, could you give me a hand? Your sister needs this to be perfect." I remembered when I launched my freelance graphic design business. It was terrifying and exhilarating. I just landed my first major client. I called my family, eager to share the news. My dad's response was lukewarm. "Well, that's good, Jessica. Just make sure you have a backup plan. That art stuff is fine as a hobby, but it's not a real career like your brother-in-law Mark S." Mark sold real estate. In my father's world, tangible things like houses were real, while the creativity that fueled my soul was a hobby. Megan, of course, had chimed in with, "I just worry about you, Jess. It sounds so unstable." There was no congratulations, only concern trolling disguised as love. From my perch at the bar, I could just make out the pantomime of their celebration. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. I saw the silver-haired server approach their table. I saw him present the deep red bottle in its cradle with professional reverence. I saw the flash of confusion on my father's face, followed by a slight, prideful puffing of his chest. He probably assumed Mark, in a fit of celebratory largesse, had ordered it. Megan's eyes widened at the fancy label. She loved displays of wealth. They all nodded, and the server began the ritual of opening and pouring the ancient wine. They raised their glasses. They toasted. To what? To their anniversary? To their perfect family? To their good fortune? They were completely, blissfully unaware of the serpent I had just introduced into their Eden. Watching them laugh and sip the wine that I had sent them felt like an out-of-body experience. I felt strangely detached, like a director watching a scene unfold exactly as she had blocked it. The 10 minutes that followed were the longest of my life. The bartender asked if I needed anything else. I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the sliver of space where my family sat. I saw them talking, eating their dessert, the wine glasses being refilled. The bottle, a symbol of everything they valued, status, wealth, exclusivity, was being enjoyed by the very people it was meant to condemn. For a moment, a flicker of doubt entered my mind. Was this a mistake? Was this just a petty, expensive prank that they would absorb without a second thought? But I knew my father. Richard Thompson was a man who meticulously checked every receipt. He bragged about the deals he got, the points he accrued on his credit cards, the smart financial moves he made. He loved the appearance of effortless wealth, but he was, at his core, a man who hated unexpected expenses. He controlled the family finances with an iron fist, and an unsanctioned charge of nearly $2,000 was not something he would simply absorb. The waiting was excruciating. It was the quiet before a storm, a stillness pregnant with impending chaos. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, the cool glass a stark contrast to the churning in my gut. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about consequences. For one night, I were going to feel a fraction of the discomfort they had so casually inflicted on me for decades. For one night, their perfect, curated world was going to have a crack in its foundation, and I was going to be there to watch it happen. The end of their meal played out in slow motion from my vantage point. The dessert plates were cleared, the coffee was served, and a comfortable, satisfied lull settled over their table. They looked like a magazine advertisement for happy families. Well-fed, well-dressed, cocooned in the warm glow of an expensive restaurant and their own self-satisfaction. My father, Richard, signaled for the check with the confident air of a man who does so often. The silver-haired server returned, placing the black leather bill portfolio discreetly on the table next to him. My father picked it up, opened it with a casual flick of his wrist, and glanced inside. His expression didn't change at first. He was likely seeing a number in the high hundreds, a figure he would consider normal for an evening at the Laurent. He pulled out his platinum credit card, ready to end the perfect evening. But then, in a gesture of patriarchal magnanimity, he passed the portfolio to his son-in-law. "Mark, just give this a look over, make sure it's all correct," he probably said. Mark took it, his eyes scanned the itemized list. He stopped. His smile vanished. He leaned forward, squinting at the paper as if he couldn't believe what it said. He looked up at my father, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. Megan, ever attuned to any shift in the emotional atmosphere, noticed Mark's strange reaction. She leaned over, her brow furrowed. "What is it?" she whispered, pulling the portfolio closer so she could see. Her reaction was not quiet, it was not whispered. The carefully constructed piece of the entire restaurant was shattered by a single, shrill cry. "What?" Heads turned from every table. The hushed conversations died down. Everyone looked toward the garden room, where a woman was now standing, her face a mask of outrage. $1,970. Megan's voice was a shriek that echoed through the atrium. "Are you serious? For wine? Mark, did you do this? This is insane." The scene was pure, unadulterated chaos. Mark was shaking his head frantically, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "No, of course not, I would never." My father snatched the bill back. His face, which had been rosy with wine and contentment, was now rapidly turning a deep, blotchy red. He stared at the receipt, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. He had lost control of the narrative, of his carefully managed public image, and he was floundering. Other diners were now openly staring, whispering behind their hands. The facade had not just cracked, it had exploded. The silver-haired server, ever the professional, materialized at their table almost instantly. "Is there a problem, sir?" he asked my father, his voice a low, calming murmur. "A problem?" my father sputtered, finally finding his voice. He stabbed a trembling finger at the receipt. "Yes, there's a problem. This bottle of wine. We didn't order a $2,000 bottle of wine." The server maintained his composure perfectly. He looked at my father with an expression of polite inquiry. "My apologies, sir, but the bottle was sent to your table per the young lady's instructions. She said to add it to your bill." A confused silence fell over their table. "The young lady?" Megan asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. "What young lady?" "The young woman from your party," the server explained patiently. "Dark blue dress. She said she was with you." He gestured vaguely toward the main dining room. "She described you, sir," he said to my father, "and instructed me to bill it to your name, Richard Thompson." Four heads swiveled in unison, their eyes scanning the restaurant, searching for this mysterious benefactor. Their gazes swept past my pillar, over the bar, across the room. I knew the moment they would see me. I took a slow sip of my water, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my hand was perfectly steady. My father's eyes found me first. They widened in disbelief, then narrowed into slits of pure fury. Megan saw him looking and followed his gaze. Her mouth fell open in a perfect O of shock and dawning comprehension. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply met my father's enraged stare from across the room, lifted my glass of water in a tiny, almost imperceptible salute, and gave a single, slow nod. Then, with a calmness that felt utterly surreal, I placed my glass down on the bar, slid off the stool, and began to walk toward the exit. I didn't rush. I moved with the unhurried pace of someone who had just finished their business and had nothing left to say. The eruption was complete. Now came the fallout. I pushed through the heavy doors of the Laurent and stepped out into the cool night air. The city sounds, a distant siren, the hum of traffic, were a welcome relief after the tense silence and sudden explosion inside. I took a deep breath, feeling the tight knot in my chest loosen just a little. I had done it. I had pulled the pin, and now all that was left to do was walk away from the blast zone. I hadn't made it 10 feet down the sidewalk when I heard the restaurant door burst open behind me. "Jessica." It was my father's voice, a roar of pure, undiluted rage that cut through the night. I stopped but didn't turn around. I closed my eyes for a second, bracing myself. I heard his heavy, angry footsteps closing the distance. He grabbed my arm, spinning me around to face him. His face was a terrifying sight. It was purple with fury, his eyes bulging. The polished, charming man from the dinner table was gone, replaced by a stranger I had only seen glimpses of before, the man who appeared whenever his authority was challenged. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't ask what had happened at the host stand. He skipped right past any possibility of his own family's wrongdoing and launched directly into the attack. "What is wrong with you?" he bellowed, his voice shaking with anger. A couple walking by gave us a wide berth. "Are you out of your mind? What was that? A pathetic cry for attention? You deliberately tried to embarrass me, to ruin your sister's anniversary. After everything we do for you, this is how you repay us. By making a spectacle and trying to stick me with a $2,000 bill. That was the most childish, spiteful, and pathetic thing I have ever seen." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, his anger didn't scare me. It didn't make me shrink or cry or want to apologize. The cold, hard point of clarity in my chest had become a shield. His words, which once would have shattered me, now bounced off it, loud but harmless. I simply stared at him, my expression calm. The lack of my usual tears or panicked apologies seemed to confuse and enrage him further. "Well," he demanded, "say something." So I did. My voice was quiet, almost conversational. "The host said I wasn't on the list." He blinked, thrown off balance by my non-emotional response. What? At the front door, I clarified, my voice remaining steady. The host told me the reservation was for 5 people. He said my name wasn't on the list. Megan told me to pop by. So I popped by and I wasn't welcome. I peeked into the room and saw all of you, laughing, celebrating without me. There wasn't even a chair. A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance at being caught, crossed his face before being instantly replaced by defensiveness. It was a simple misunderstanding. Megan probably just forgot to tell the restaurant. No, I said, the single word sharp and final. It wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a message, and I finally received it. I looked him directly in the eye. The wine wasn't a punishment, it was a gift. Think of it as a very expensive anniversary present, or maybe a farewell present. His face contorted again. A farewell present? Don't be so dramatic, Jessica. You're twisting things just like you always do. There it was, the old, reliable script. I was the dramatic one. I was the one twisting things. Am I asked, my voice still dangerously calm. Was I twisting things when you threw Megan a catered graduation party and then forgot to buy enough food for mine because you were busy with her? Was I being dramatic when you bought her a new car and gave me a bus pass and a lecture? Or is it that I'm just too sensitive for wanting to be treated like I'm actually a part of my own family? I delivered the words without heat. They were not accusations, they were facts. I was an auditor reading the final report on a failed company. Just then, Megan and Mark came rushing out of the restaurant. Megan's face was tear-streaked and furious. There you are, she shrieked, pointing a finger at me. How could you, Jessica? You ruined my anniversary. You did this just to hurt me because you're jealous. You've always been jealous of me. I looked from her enraged face to my father's, then to Mark, who was hovering behind them, looking deeply uncomfortable but saying nothing. I saw the 3 of them, a united front against me, the designated problem. And in that moment, my shield of clarity became permanent. The fight was over. It had been over for years. I was just the last one to realize it. I looked back at my father. I am done, I said softly, but with a finality that silenced them all. I am done trying to earn a seat at your table. You can have it. Enjoy the wine. Enjoy your perfect family. I turned my back on them. Jessica, you get back here, my father yelled. Megan shouted my name, her voice thick with venom. I just kept walking. I pulled my phone out of my purse as I walked down the block. With steady fingers, I opened my contacts. I found Dad and pressed block. I found me. Gan and pressed block. I found Mom, and, with a pang of regret for the mother she could have been, I pressed block. I didn't run, I didn't look back. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, away from the explosion and toward the quiet, unknown territory of a life without them. Walking away was the strangest feeling I've ever experienced. It wasn't the triumphant, movie-ending moment I might have imagined. There was no soaring music, no feeling of righteous victory. There was just the rhythmic sound of my own footsteps on the pavement and the vast, hollow space they had left behind. It was the terrifying, liberating emptiness of a clean slate. The blocked calls started almost immediately, a series of notifications that flashed on my screen and then vanished. Then came the voicemails, left from Mark's phone, which I hadn't thought to block. I listened to the first few seconds of one from my mother. Jessica, you need to call me. You have created such a mess. You need to be the bigger person and apologize for the scene you caused. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Be the bigger person. The eternal mantra of the enabler. Asking the injured party to absorb the blow and pretend it didn't happen for the sake of a false peace. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions of my life, working on my design projects with a ferocious, single-minded focus. Work was a comfort. It was logical. Effort produced results. It was everything my family was not. My friends, who had long witnessed the toxic dynamic from a distance, rallied around me. They didn't offer platitudes or tell me, but they're your family. They brought me pizza, sat with me in comfortable silence, and listened when I finally felt ready to talk about it. not as a tragedy, but as a conclusion. The silence from my family, once the frantic blocked calls stopped, was deafening at first. I kept checking my phone, my email, my social media, half expecting some new form of attack or a dramatic, insincere apology. But there was nothing. Just silence. And slowly, over the course of a week, that deafening silence began to transform. It became peaceful. I started to notice something I hadn't realized was even there. A constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been my companion for my entire adult life was gone. The tension in my shoulders eased. I wasn't constantly bracing for the next casual slight, the next backhanded compliment, the next phone call that would leave me feeling small and worthless. I had been living in a state of high alert for so long, I had mistaken it for normal. The absence of their influence in my life wasn't a void. It was a quiet space where I could finally hear my own thoughts. A few months passed. Autumn turned to winter. I thrived in the quiet. My business grew. I reconnected with old friends. I adopted a cat. I built a life that was mine, on my own terms, funded by my own hobby of a career. One afternoon, I was cleaning out a closet and found a small, dusty box of old photos. I sat on the floor and sifted through them. There I was at age 7, proudly holding up a drawing, while Megan stood slightly in front of me, holding a soccer trophy and beaming at the camera. There I was at 15, looking awkward in my braces, while Megan, a senior, looked effortlessly beautiful in her prom dress. In every photo, the dynamic was the same. She was the star, basking in the flashbulb's light. I was in her shadow, slightly out of focus. I looked at the girl in those photos, the girl who tried so hard, who just wanted her dad to look at her drawing with the same pride he looked at her sister's trophy. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a deep, profound compassion for her. She had tried her best for so long. And I, the woman she had grown into, had finally done right by her. I had finally stopped asking her to stand in the shadows and wait for a light that was never going to turn her way. The incident at the Laurent wasn't about the wine or the money. It was about drawing a boundary. It was about creating an event so undeniable, so clear, that it could never be gaslit away, never be twisted into me being too sensitive. It was a full stop at the end of a very long, very painful chapter. I didn't need to slam the door. I just needed to close it gently and lock it from my side. I had finally chosen myself. And in doing so, I had given myself the one thing they never could: unconditional acceptance. So I have to ask you, the listener, was I wrong to finally stop asking for a seat at a table I was never welcome at? What would you have done?